Welcome, dear listeners, to Death of Dr. Haydock in Willowby Forge, a Miss Marple killer story. Settle into your favorite armchair with a cup of tea as we journey to the quaint English village of St. Mary Mead in the 1950s. Here, amid blooming gardens and gossiping neighbors, our sharp-eyed sleuth, Miss Jane Marple, unravels a puzzling mystery. This cozy tale of intrigue and intellect is narrated for your enjoyment, spanning 10 chapters of clever clues and village charm. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Village Fete and a Shocking Discovery. In the heart of St. Mary Mead, where time seemed to dawdle like a leisurely Sunday stroll, the village of the 1950s was a tapestry of thatched cottages, rose-covered trellises, and the faint chime of the church bell marking the hours. Willowby Forge, the ancient village hall with its weathered stone walls and steeply pitched thatch roof, stood as the proud centerpiece of community gatherings. Its timbers, blackened by centuries, whispered tales of feasts, weddings, and whispered scandals long forgotten by all but the eldest residents. On this golden afternoon in late July, the hall's grounds buzzed with the annual village fete, a cherished tradition that drew every soul in St. Mary Mead, from toddling children to stooped grandmothers. The air was thick with the scents of summer, freshly cut grass, warm scones slathered with clotted cream, and the sweet tang of homemade strawberry jam. Stalls lined the lawn, their canvas awnings fluttering in the gentle breeze. Mrs. Price Ridley, a formidable woman with a penchant for prize marrows, presided over her vegetable display with the authority of a general, her apron starched to perfection. Nearby, young Dolly Bantry, her auburn curls bouncing, giggled as she tossed rings at a hoopla stand, casting shy glances at the postman, who blushed under his cap. The brass band, slightly out of tune but enthusiastic, filled the air with a jaunty rendition of Greensleeves, while children darted. The guest of honor, Dr. James Haydock, was the village's beloved physician, a robust man in his early 50s with a kind face, a neatly trimmed mustache, and a pipe perpetually tucked in his jacket pocket. His laughter boomed across the lawn as he judged the baking contest, a role he relished each year. "Splendid scones, Mrs. Weatherby," he declared, his voice warm as he bit into one generously topped with cream and jam. "You've outdone yourself." Mrs. Weatherby beamed, her round cheeks flushing with pride, though Miss Marple noted a flicker of unease in her eyes, perhaps the pressure of competition, or something more. Dr. Haydock moved to the tea tent, where a silver urn gleamed under the canvas, dispensing steaming cups to thirsty villagers. He accepted a delicate china teacup from Mrs. Eleanor Haydock, his elegant wife, whose tailored dress and new pearl necklace caught the sunlight. "Thank you, my dear," he said, raising the cup in a mock toast. Miss Marple, from her shaded vantage point, watched the exchange closely. Mrs. Haydock's smile was tight, her fingers lingering on the pearls as if they were a talisman. The doctor sipped his tea, then paused to compliment Miss Lavinia Croft, the stern schoolteacher, on her prize-winning roses displayed nearby. "Exquisite, Lavinia," he said. Miss Croft, her gray buns severe and her eyes sharp behind spectacles, nodded curtly, her hands clasped tightly. The fete hummed along, a perfect tableau of village harmony. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her thoughts drifting to a similar fete years ago, when a stolen pie had revealed a surprising thief among the choir boys. Human nature, she mused, was as predictable as the seasons. yet always held surprises. She glanced at young Dr. Simon Trent, the new assistant physician, who hovered near the tea tent, his handsome face alight with ambition as he chatted with villagers. His expensive watch glinted, a curious extravagance for a junior doctor. Nearby, Mr. Reginald Forbes, the pharmacist, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous tic, adjusted his stall of herbal remedies for order, his military instincts kicking in, while Dolly clung to his arm, pale with shock. Miss Croft stood frozen, her lips pressed thin, and Dr. Trent pushed through, kneeling to check the doctor's pulse. "He's gone," Trent said, his voice steady but his eyes wide. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her heart heavy but her mind alert. She stepped closer, her sensible shoes silent on the grass, and bent to examine the scene. The spilled teacup caught her eye, its delicate handle chipped, a few grains of sugar scattered nearby. That scent, bitter almonds, confirmed her suspicion. Cyanide, she thought, her mind racing to cases she'd read about in her youth. Poison in a teacup, at a village fete? It was audacious, deliberate, and deeply personal. Someone among the cheerful crowd had planned this. Inspector Slack arrived within the hour, his police car crunching onto the village green. A brusque man with a pencil mustache and a disdain for village nonsense, he barked orders to his constables, who cordoned off the tea tent. "Likely an accident," he muttered, scribbling in his notebook. "Food poisoning, perhaps." But Miss Marple, standing quietly to the side, knew better. Accidents did not smell of cyanide, nor did they strike with such precision. She caught the inspector's eye, but he waved her off, assuming the elderly spinster had nothing to contribute beyond gossip. The villagers dispersed, their chatter subdued, the fete abandoned. Mrs. Price Ridley whispered about cursed scones, while Mrs. Weatherby wrung her hands, insisting her baking was flawless. Colonel Bantry escorted Dolly home, his face grim. Miss Croft gathered her roses with mechanical precision, and Mr. Forbes packed his stall, his hands trembling. Dr. Trent lingered, offering hushed condolences to Mrs. Haydock, who stood alone, her pearls gleaming like tears in the fading light. Miss Marple, the village began to hum with whispers of the tragedy at Willowby Forge. The annual fete, so recently alive with laughter and the clink of teacups, now lay abandoned, its stalls half-packed and bunting drooping like wilted flowers. Dr. James Haydock's sudden death had cast a pall over the community, and the faint, acrid scent of bitter almonds lingered in the minds of those who had stood near his fallen form. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting safely tucked into her wicker basket, made her way to the vicarage, where the air was thick with shock and suspicion. Her sensible shoes tapped lightly on the stone path, and her sharp eyes, hidden behind a gentle smile, took in every detail of the village's subdued bustle. The vicarage, a modest Georgian house with ivy climbing its walls, was the natural gathering place for St. Mary Mead's residents in times of crisis. Reverend Clement Harmon, a kindly man with a perpetually distracted air, had opened his doors to offer tea and solace, though his wife Griselda fluttered about with more enthusiasm than organization, her youthful energy at odds with the somber mood. The drawing room, with its faded chintz curtains and well-worn armchairs, was crowded with villagers, their voices a low murmur punctuated by the clink of teaspoons. Miss Marple settled into a corner by the fireplace, her knitting needles resuming their rhythmic dance, a soft blue scarf growing stitch by stitch. To the casual observer, she was merely a frail spinster, but her ears caught every word, and her mind wove connections as deftly as her needles. Inspector Slack, still brusque and dismissive, stood by the window, scribbling in his notebook. "Accidental poisoning, most likely," he declared to no one in particular, his pencil mustache twitching. "Some chemical mix-up at the fete. We'll test the scones." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Cyanide, she knew, was no accident. It required intent, opportunity, and a steady hand. She glanced around the room, where the first threads of suspicion were beginning to form, like the warp and weft of a tapestry. Marriage that had reached Miss Marple's ears via the village grapevine. Nearby, Mr. Reginald Forbes, the pharmacist, perched on the edge of an armchair, his thin frame hunched as if trying to shrink from notice. His wire-rimmed glasses glinted as he adjusted them nervously, a tick twitching at the corner of his mouth. "A terrible loss," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Miss Marple remembered the recent gossip. Forbes and Dr. Haydock had argued over a botched prescription, a mistake that had nearly cost a patient's life. "Just a professional disagreement," Forbes added quickly, as if sensing her scrutiny, but his hands trembled, spilling a drop of tea onto his waistcoat. As he dabbed at it with a handkerchief, a small button rolled onto the floor, unnoticed by all but Miss Marple. It was mismatched to his coat. Curious, she thought, pocketing it discreetly. Forbes had access to chemicals, including cyanide for pest control, and his stall had been near the tea tent. Miss Lavinia Croft, the village school teacher, stood stiffly by the bookcase, her gray bun as severe as her expression. Her spectacles magnified her sharp eyes, which darted about the room like a bird of prey. A spinster in her late 50s, she was known for her strict discipline and her passion for gardening, particularly her prize roses. "Dr. Haydock was a good man," she said curtly, her hands clasped tightly. Yet Miss Marple recalled overhearing her at the fete, complaining to the vicar that the doctor had refused her request for funds to repair the school roof. "A matter of priorities," she'd snapped then, her voice bitter. Miss Croft's garden included foxgloves, digitalis, a poison, though not cyanide. Still, her knowledge of plants and her presence near the tea tent made her a figure of interest. Colonel Arthur Bantry, Dolly's father, paced by the hearth, his military bearing undiminished by retirement. His ruddy face was set in a scowl, and his booming voice carried over the murmurs. "Damned shame, losing Haydock," he said, pausing to light his pipe, face catching the light, a luxury beyond a junior doctor's means. Trent stood to inherit the practice, a powerful motive, and he had been at the tea tent, fetching sugar for the urn. His polished demeanor felt too perfect, like a rehearsed performance. The room buzzed with tension, each suspect offering condolences while casting sidelong glances. Griselda, ever the enthusiastic hostess, pressed more tea on everyone, her chatter filling awkward silences. "Such a dreadful thing," she said, her curls bouncing. "Who would have cyanide at a fete?" Inspector Slack snorted, muttering about village hysterics. But Miss Marple's mind was already at work. Cyanide required access, perhaps from Forbes's pharmacy, or Croft's gardening supplies, and opportunity, which all five had. Motives she knew would emerge from the fabric of village life: greed, jealousy, revenge, or hidden shame. As the gathering dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her knitting a steady rhythm. She approached Mrs. Haydock, offering a gentle word of condolence. "You must be devastated, my dear," she said, her eyes soft but searching. Mrs. Haydock nodded, her fingers tightening on her pearls. "James received an odd letter last week," she confided, her voice low. "Anonymous. Something about old sins catching up. I thought it nonsense." Miss Marple's needles paused. An anonymous letter. A clue, perhaps, or a deliberate distraction. Outside, the village was quiet, the stars emerging in a velvet sky. Miss Marple walked to the pharmacy where Forbes was locking up, his hands still unsteady. "Terrible day," she said kindly, stooping to retrieve a dropped vial he hadn't noticed. Its label read, "Potassium cyanide, pest control." Forbes blanched. "For rats," he stammered, snatching it back. Miss Marple smiled benignly, but her mind catalogued the detail. She passed Miss Croft's cottage, where the schoolteacher was pruning her roses by lantern light. "Can't sleep?" Miss Marple called softly. Miss Croft's reply was curt. "Work keeps the mind steady." Yet Miss Marple noted a faint tremble in her hands. A cyanide vial, the teacup shard, the tobacco scent, the costly watch. Clues as delicate as her stitches, yet each a thread in the mystery. The suspects had emerged, their motives shadowy but present. Inheritance for Mrs. Haydock, professional rivalry for Forbes, resentment for Croft, pride for Bantry, ambition for Trent. St. Mary Mead's cozy surface hid darker currents, and Miss Marple knew that unraveling them would require patience, observation, and a keen understanding of human nature. As the church clock struck 9, she tucked her knitting away. The fete was over, but the investigation had just begun. Chapter 3. Whispers and Initial Clues. As twilight settled over St. Mary Mead, the village seemed to hold its breath, the golden warmth of the fete replaced by a chill of unease. The cobbled lanes, usually alive with the chatter of neighbors and the clatter of milk bottles, were hushed, save for the occasional murmur of speculation drifting from open windows. Willowby Forge, the ancient village hall where Dr. James Haydock had met his tragic end, stood silent, its thatched roof casting jagged shadows in the fading light. The scent of honeysuckle mingled with the memory of bitter almonds, a reminder of the poison that had shattered the village's tranquility. Miss Jane Marple, her wicker basket slung over her arm, walked slowly along the lane, her sensible shoes tapping a steady rhythm. Her white hair gleamed under her straw hat, and her sharp eyes scanned the familiar cottages, noting the drawn curtains and the anxious glances of passers-by. Her knitting, safely tucked away, would wait, for now her mind was busy stitching together the first clues of the mystery. The vicarage gathering had dispersed, leaving behind a tangle of half-spoken suspicions and guarded glances. Miss Marple had observed the 5 key suspects: Mrs. Eleanor Haydock, Mr. Reginald Forbes, Miss Lavinia Croft, Colonel Arthur Bantry, and Dr. Simon Trent, each with opportunity and, she suspected, motives yet to be uncovered. The anonymous letter mentioned by Mrs. Haydock moved. "It's all so dreadful. James was everything to me." Her voice faltered, but her eyes remained dry, and Miss Marple noted the careful placement of her words, as if rehearsed. "I'm sure it's a terrible shock," Miss Marple said gently, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her knitting, the blue scarf growing stitch by stitch. "You mentioned an anonymous letter." Mrs. Haydock hesitated, her fingers tightening on her cup. "Yes, last week," she said. "It was slipped under our door." James laughed it off, but it upset him. It said something about old sins catching up. "I thought it a cruel prank." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging the detail. An anonymous letter could be a clue or a distraction, but its timing, days before the murder, suggested intent. "Did you keep it?" she asked. Mrs. Haydock shook her head. "James burned it. He said it was nonsense." But her gaze flickered to the fireplace, where a faint trace of ash lingered. Miss Marple made a mental note. The widow's composure was too perfect, her grief too polished. Leaving the cottage, Miss Marple strolled to the village pharmacy, where Mr. Reginald Forbes was locking up for the night. The shop, with its rows of neatly labeled bottles and the faint scent of lavender, was a testament to Forbes's meticulous nature. Yet his nervous tic betrayed unease. "Miss Marple," he said, startled as she approached. "Dreadful business about Dr. Haydock." His glasses slipped down his nose and he pushed them up with a trembling hand. "Indeed," she replied, her tone kind but probing. "You must handle many chemicals in your work." Forbes nodded, too quickly. "Oh yes, but all safe, properly stored." As he spoke, a small vial slipped from his pocket, clinking onto the floor. Miss Marple bent to retrieve it, noting the label. "Potassium cyanide, pest control." Forbes snatched it back, his face pale. "For rats in the storeroom," he stammered. "Nothing to do with, you know." Miss Marple smiled benignly, but the vial's presence confirmed her suspicions. Forbes had access to the murder weapon and had been near the tea tent. "Church fund more important," she said sharply. "A matter of priorities," he said. Her tone was bitter, and Miss Marple recalled overhearing her at the fete, muttering about a wartime secret involving Colonel Bantry. "Did you see anything odd at the tea tent?" Miss Marple asked. Miss Croft hesitated, then said, "I saw the Colonel arguing with Haydock. Something about old debts. A clue, perhaps, or a deflection." Miss Marple thanked her and moved on, noting a discarded teacup shard in the compost heap, odd for a woman so precise. The village pub, the Blue Boar, was her next destination, its warm lights spilling onto the lane. Inside, Dr. Simon Trent sat at the bar nursing a pint and charming the barmaid with his easy smile. His expensive watch gleamed under the lamplight, a curious extravagance for a junior doctor. Miss Marple lingered outside, her presence unnoticed as she overheard Trent speaking to the barmaid. "Dr. Haydock gave me my start," he said, his voice smooth. "A generous man, but perhaps too trusting." The barmaid giggled, and Trent's tone shifted, almost calculating. Miss Marple's mind turned to his ambition. He stood to inherit the practice, a powerful motive. Had he been too close to the tea tent, fetching sugar for the urn? She recalled his polished demeanor at the vicarage, too perfect, like a well-rehearsed script. Her final stop was Bantry Manor, where Colonel Arthur Bantry sat by a roaring fire, polishing his medals with a vigor that suggested distraction. His ruddy face was set in a scowl, and his pipe filled the room with the scent of tobacco, the same scent Miss Marple had noted near Haydock's body. "Evening, Miss Marple," he boomed, offering her a chair. "Damned awful business." She nodded, her knitting steady. "You and Dr. Haydock had words, I hear," she said gently. The colonel puffed his pipe, his eyes narrowing. "Village council nonsense," he said. "And, well, he was meddling with Dolly. She's young, impressionable, had a silly crush on him. China cup that had held the poison. At her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and settled by the window, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The scarf grew longer, its soft blue wool a contrast to the dark threads of suspicion. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and blooming gardens, was a stage for human nature's quiet dramas: greed, jealousy, pride, or shame. The clues were subtle, hidden in everyday moments: a letter's ash, a vial's label, a shard's edge, a watch's gleam, a tobacco's scent. Miss Marple knew that unraveling the truth would require patience, like waiting for a pattern to emerge from her stitches. As the stars glittered above, she tucked her knitting away, her mind already anticipating the next day's inquiries. The mystery of Dr. Haydock's death was deepening, and St. Mary Mead's secrets were only beginning to unfold. Chapter 4. A False Trail in the Garden. The morning after Dr. James Haydock's tragic death at Willowby Forge, St. Mary Mead awoke to a sky heavy with clouds, as if the village itself mourned under a gray veil. The cobbled lanes, usually bustling with early risers, milkmen clinking bottles, children scampering to school, were subdued, the air thick with whispers of poison and betrayal. The scent of honeysuckle, so sweet the previous evening, now seemed cloying, a reminder of the bitter almond trace that had marked the doctor's final moments. Miss Jane Marple, her wicker basket tucked under her arm, stepped out from her cottage, her straw hat shielding her sharp eyes from the drizzle. Her knitting, a soft blue scarf half finished, remained at home. Today her hands were free to gather clues, her mind alert to the subtle threads of suspicion weaving through the village. The events at the vicarage and her evening inquiries had painted a vivid picture. 5 suspects: Mrs. Eleanor Haydock, Mr. Reginald Forbes, Miss Lavinia Croft, Colonel Arthur Bantry, and Dr. Simon Trent, each with opportunity near the tea tent and motives hinted at but not yet clear. Gray bun as tight as her expression. Work steadies the nerves, she replied curtly, her pruning shears snipping a wilted bloom. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes catching a glint in the soil, a shard of china, half buried, its edge smeared with a trace of strawberry jam. "Oh dear," she said, bending to retrieve it. "A teacup? Discarded here?" Miss Croft's hands froze. "Children," she said quickly, "always breaking things." But her voice wavered, and Miss Marple noted the shard's similarity to those at the fete. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind turning. The shard held no poison. Tests had confirmed the cyanide was in the tea, but its presence in Croft's garden suggested carelessness or intent. As Miss Marple thanked Miss Croft and turned to leave, Inspector Slack's police car rumbled into view, its tires crunching on the gravel path. The inspector, his pencil mustache twitching with self-assurance, strode toward them, trailed by a young constable. "Miss Marple," he said brusquely, barely acknowledging her. "Miss Croft, a word." He held up a photograph of a scruffy man in a tattered coat. "This vagrant was seen near Willowby Forge yesterday. Likely our man. Outsiders always bring trouble." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. The vagrant, a wanderer known to pass through St. Mary Mead, was a convenient scapegoat. But cyanide required planning, not impulse. "Have you questioned him?" she asked mildly. Slack snorted. "We're tracking him. He'll confess soon enough." Miss Croft nodded, her relief palpable. but Miss Marple sensed a distraction, a false trail meant to divert attention from the village. Her next stop was the Haydock cottage, where Mrs. Eleanor Haydock was hosting a small memorial tea, a gesture of mourning that felt more formal than heartfelt. The parlor was crowded with villagers, Mrs. Price Ridley with her Marrows, Griselda Harmon fluttering about, and Colonel Bantry, his pipe smoke curling in the air. Mrs. Haydock, her pearl necklace gleaming, poured tea with a steady hand, her black dress impeccable.
Gossip. Miss Marple observed Forbes closely as he adjusted his waistcoat, his hands trembling. The button she'd found yesterday, mismatched to his coat, was still in her pocket, a small but nagging clue. She approached him quietly as the gathering dispersed. "Mr. Forbes," she said kindly, "you seem shaken." He flinched, his tic more pronounced. "It's the shock," he muttered, "and Bantry's nonsense. That prescription was a mistake, not malice." Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming. "Of course. But you were near the tea tent, weren't you?" Forbes hesitated, then nodded. "Fetching sugar for Mrs. Weatherby," he said. Nothing more. His alibi was plausible, but his nervousness suggested more than grief. As Miss Marple left the cottage, she spotted Dr. Simon Trent in the garden, speaking softly to Mrs. Haydock. Their heads were close, his hand brushing hers, a gesture too intimate for mere condolence. Trent's expensive watch caught the light, and Miss Marple's mind turned to his ambition. Was he consoling a widow or securing an ally? She recalled his presence at the tea tent, fetching sugar alongside Forbes. A coincidence or a shared opportunity? She approached, her voice gentle. "Dr. Trent, you must feel Dr. Haydock's loss keenly." Trent's smile was smooth, practiced. "He was a mentor," he said. "I owe him everything." But his eyes darted, and Miss Marple sensed calculation beneath his charm. "You were at the tea tent," she said casually. "Did you notice anything odd?" Trent shrugged. "Just the usual bustle." Mrs. Haydock was pouring tea. Forbes was fussing with sugar. Nothing unusual. His nonchalance was too perfect, and Miss Marple filed it away. Her final stop was the village green, where the remnants of the fete were being cleared. Mrs. Weatherby, the baker, was packing her stall, her round face creased with worry. "My scones are perfect," she insisted, unprompted, as Miss Marple approached. "No poison in them." Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. "Of course not, dear. But you saw the tea tent?" Mrs. Weatherby nodded, pointed to professional rivalry. But his own temper and tobacco scent tied him to the scene. Mrs. Haydock's intimacy with Trent hinted at an affair, a motive for murder, while Forbes's cyanide access and nervous demeanor raised suspicions. Trent's ambition and costly watch suggested greed, and Croft's bitterness over the school roof and her knowledge of poisons could not be ignored. Each suspect had been near the tea tent, their alibis fragile as the china that had held the fatal tea. At her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and settled by the window, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The blue scarf grew longer, its soft wool a contrast to the dark threads of suspicion. The clues were accumulating. The shard, the button, the letters ash, the tobacco, the watch. Yet they were scattered, like stitches waiting for a pattern. St. Mary Mead's cozy surface hid deeper currents. Jealousy, greed, or shame. And Miss Marple knew that human nature, like her knitting, revealed its secrets only with care. As the rain pattered against the panes, she tucked her knitting away, her mind already planning the next day's inquiries. The false trail of the vagrant would not distract her. The truth lay closer,
hidden in the everyday moments of village life. Chapter 5. Misdirection at the vicarage. The drizzle of the previous day had cleared, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in the soft golden light of a summer morning. The village, with its thatched cottages and blooming roses, seemed determined to reclaim its cozy charm. Yet an undercurrent of unease lingered, like a shadow cast by the ancient oaks. The shocking death of Dr. James Haydock at Willowby Forge had stirred the village like a stone dropped in a still pond, its ripples spreading through whispered conversations and sidelong glances. Miss Jane Marple, her wicker basket slung over her arm, stepped out from her cottage, her straw hat tilted against the sun. Her knitting remained at home, the soft blue scarf set aside for now. Her hands were free to gather the threads of suspicion, her sharp eyes scanning the familiar lanes for the vicarage, with its ivy-clad walls and sagging gate, exuded a comforting familiarity, but the air inside was thick with unspoken accusations. Griselda Harmon, the vicar's youthful wife, fluttered about the drawing room, her curls bouncing as she arranged teacups and biscuits. "Such a dreadful time," she said, her voice bright but strained. "Tea will help, won't it?" Miss Marple, settling into a faded armchair by the window, smiled gently, her eyes missing nothing. Her presence, unassuming and elderly, allowed her to blend into the background, a silent observer of the drama unfolding. The suspects were all present, their faces a study in guarded emotion. Mrs. Eleanor Haydock sat primly on a velvet settee, her black dress immaculate, her pearl necklace catching the morning light. Her composure was flawless, but Miss Marple noted the way her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief, betraying unease. Mr. Reginald Forbes hovered near the door, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping as he fidgeted, his nervous tic more pronounced than ever. Miss Lavinia Croft stood by the bookcase, her gray bun severe and her spectacles glinting, her lips pressed into a thin line. Colonel Arthur Bantry paced by the hearth, his pipe smoke curling upward, his ruddy face set in a scowl. Dr. Simon Trent leaned against the wall, his handsome features composed, his expensive watch gleaming, a reminder of his ambition. Reverend Harmon began the service, his voice soft and faltering as he spoke of Dr. Haydock's kindness. But the atmosphere grew tense when Mrs. Price Ridley, ever the gossip, whispered loudly to Griselda, "I heard the doctor's will left a fortune to the church. Cut out the widow entirely." Mrs. Haydock's head snapped up, her eyes sharp. "That's nonsense," she said coldly. "James's will was fair. The church gets a donation, but I'm provided for." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of fear in her gaze. A motive, perhaps, if the will's terms were less generous than she claimed. She made a mental note to inquire further. At nearly falling. "I told you it was for rats," he protested, his voice rising. Griselda intervened, her hands fluttering. "Now, Colonel, let's not accuse without proof." But Miss Marple noted Forbes's pallor and the way his hands shook, clutching his waistcoat. The button she'd found, mismatched to his coat, remained a nagging clue, suggesting he'd been careless at the tea tent. Dr. Trent, ever charming, approached Mrs. Haydock, offering a sympathetic smile. "You're bearing up bravely, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, observed their exchange. Trent's hand lingered near hers, a gesture too familiar for mere condolence. Was their closeness a motive for murder, or a red herring? She recalled Trent's claim at the pub. Haydock had been too trusting. a hint of betrayal perhaps, masked by his polished demeanor. Miss Croft, meanwhile, stood apart, her eyes darting about the room. Miss Marple approached her, her tone gentle. "Lavinia, you must feel the loss keenly with your work at the school." Miss Croft's lips tightened. "He was a good man but misguided," she said. "That roof needed fixing." Her bitterness was palpable, and Miss Marple recalled the teacup shard in her garden, smeared with jam. "Did you notice anything at the tea tent?" she asked. Miss Croft hesitated, then said, "Dr. Trent was fussing with the sugar bowl. Odd for a doctor." A deliberate misdirection, or a genuine observation? Miss Marple thanked her, her mind cataloging the accusation. As the gathering dispersed, Inspector Slack arrived, his brusqueness undiminished. "We've got the vagrant in custody," he announced, his pencil mustache twitching. "Found him near the forge with a stolen scone, no less. Case closed." Miss Marple's lips pursed. The vagrant, a wanderer named Tom Pike, was known for petty theft, not murder. Cyanide required planning, not opportunism. "Have you tested the tea?" she asked mildly. Slack's bowl. Mrs. Weatherby nodded, her hands wringing. Dr. Trent was adding sugar to the urn, and Miss Croft was nearby, looking flustered. Then she stepped away. Another crack in an alibi, or another distraction. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind turning to Trent's and Croft's proximity to the sugar bowl. As she walked home, the sun climbing higher, Miss Marple's thoughts wove a delicate pattern. The vagrant was a red herring, as she'd suspected, but Trent's suggestion of poisoned scones was a deliberate misdirection, contradicted by the tests. The torn letter fragment, "Your affair ends now," pointed to a personal motive, perhaps tying Mrs. Haydock to Trent. Forbes's nervousness and cyanide access kept him in the frame, while Croft's bitterness and the teacup shard suggested hidden guilt. Bantry's temper and tobacco scent linked him to the scene, but his accusation against Forbes felt like deflection. Each suspect's alibi was fraying, like a poorly knit seam. And the clues, letter, shard, button, watch, tobacco, were accumulating. Yet the truth remained elusive. At her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and settled by the window, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The blue scarf grew longer, its soft wool a contrast to the dark threads of suspicion. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and blooming gardens, was a stage for human nature's quiet dramas. Jealousy, greed, betrayal. The letter fragment was a new thread, suggesting an affair. But whose? The sugar bowl, mentioned by multiple witnesses, was a focal point, but the poison's source remained unclear. Miss Marple knew that unraveling the mystery required patience, like waiting for a pattern to emerge from her stitches. As the church clock chimed noon, she tucked her knitting away, her mind already planning the next day's inquiries. The misdirections were multiplying, but the truth, she sensed, was closer than ever, hidden in the everyday moments of village life. Chapter 6. Deepening Shadows. The golden morning light that had greeted St. Mary Mead had softened into the hazy glow of early afternoon, casting long shadows across the cobbled lanes and fragment. "Your affair ends now," to the growing tapestry of clues. The anonymous letter's ash, the cyanide vial, the teacup shard, the tobacco scent, and Dr. Trent's costly watch. The false trails, Inspector Slack's vagrant and Dr. Trent's suggestion of poisoned scones had failed to distract Miss Marple from the 5 suspects. Mrs. Eleanor Haydock, Mr. Reginald Forbes, Miss Lavinia Croft, Colonel Arthur Bantry, and Dr. Simon Trent. Each had been near the tea tent, their alibis fraying like a poorly knit seam. Motives, greed, jealousy, the trail, hovered just out of reach, but Miss Marple knew that human nature, like her knitting, revealed its secrets through patience and observation. Today, she would probe deeper, following the whispers that echoed through St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes. Her first stop was Bantry Manor, where Colonel Arthur Bantry was tending his roses, his military bearing softened by the gentle task. The manor's sprawling lawns and ivy-clad walls exuded old-world charm, but the colonel's ruddy face was creased with worry as he snipped a wilted bloom. "Miss Marple," he boomed, straightening. "Dreadful business, this." His pipe, unlit but ever-present, dangled from his pocket, its tobacco scent matching the one near Haydock's body. Miss Marple smiled gently. "Indeed, Colonel. You mentioned Dr. Haydock's meddling with Dolly. Was it serious?" Bantry's scowl deepened. "The man encouraged her silly crush," he said gruffly. "Told her she'd make a fine nurse. Filled her head with nonsense." His tone was protective, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of anger, perhaps at a perceived slight to his family's honor. "You argued with him at the fete," she said softly. Bantry puffed out his chest. "A word about village matters, nothing more. Wartime secrets, some said, but that's rubbish." His denial was firm, but Miss Marple recalled Miss Croft's mention of old debts. Was Bantry hiding a deeper grudge? Next, she visited the schoolhouse, where Miss Lavinia Croft was. At the pharmacy, Mr. Reginald Forbes was restocking shelves, his nervous tic more pronounced under Miss Marple's gaze. The shop's lavender scent was overlaid with the sharp tang of chemicals, and Miss Marple noted a locked cabinet behind the counter. "Mr. Forbes," she said kindly, "you mentioned supplying cyanide to Miss Croft." Forbes flinched, his glasses slipping. "Yes, for rats," he said quickly. "All above board," but his hands shook as he adjusted a bottle, and Miss Marple's eyes fell on a ledger, its pages slightly askew. "May I see your stock records?" she asked. Forbes paled, then produced the ledger, revealing a discrepancy. A vial of cyanide unaccounted for. "A clerical error," he stammered, but Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "Of course," she said, but the mismatched button in her pocket and his nervous demeanor suggested more than a mistake. Her next stop was the Blue Boar, where Dr. Simon Trent was charming a group of villagers, his expensive watch glinting as he gestured. Miss Marple lingered outside, overhearing snippets of conversation. "Haydock was generous," Trent said, his voice smooth. "But he didn't understand ambition." The barmaid laughed, but Miss Marple caught a calculating edge in his tone. She approached, her smile gentle. "Dr. Trent, you were close to Mrs. Haydock at the memorial tea." Trent's smile faltered, then recovered. "Just offering comfort," he said. "She's alone now." But Miss Marple recalled the letter fragment. "Your affair ends now," and the intimacy she'd witnessed. "You handled the sugar bowl," she said casually. Trent shrugged. "Helping out, nothing more." His nonchalance was too practiced, and Miss Marple noted his ambition, tied to the practice he stood to inherit. Her final stop was the Haydock cottage, where Mrs. Eleanor Haydock was sorting through her husband's papers, her pearl necklace gleaming against her black dress. The parlor was as immaculate as before, but a faint air of disquiet lingered. "Miss Marple," she said, "Mrs. Haydock and Trent. But was it motive enough for murder?" Forbes's missing cyanide vial and nervous tic suggested guilt, yet his fear seemed genuine. Miss Croft's access to cyanide and the teacup shard in her garden raised suspicions, but her alibi, stepping away for air, held, if barely. Bantry's tobacco scent and protective anger over Dolly hinted at a personal grudge, perhaps tied to the wartime secret Croft had mentioned. Trent's ambition and costly watch, coupled with his intimacy with the widow, made him a strong contender, but his charm masked his true intentions. The clues were accumulating. The letter fragment, the missing vial, the shard, the tobacco, the watch. Yet they were scattered, like stitches waiting for a needle. Miss Marple recalled a case from her youth, where a poisoner had hidden their weapon in plain sight, disguised as an everyday item. Was the sugar bowl, mentioned by multiple witnesses, the key? Or was it another misdirection, like the vagrant or the scones? The suspects' alibis were fraying. Their motives, greed, jealousy, betrayal, coming into focus, but the truth remained just out of reach. At her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and settled by the window, her knitting resuming its rhythm, its soft wool a contrast to the darkening shadows of suspicion. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and blooming gardens, was a stage for human nature's quiet dramas. The letter fragment suggested a scandal. But whose? The missing cyanide vial pointed to Forbes or Croft, but the tobacco scent tied Bantry to the scene. Trent's ambition and Mrs. Haydock's pearls hinted at a shared secret, but the teacup shard in Croft's garden nagged at her. Miss Marple knew that unraveling the mystery required patience, like waiting for a pattern to emerge from her stitches. As the church clock chimed 6, she tucked her knitting away, her mind already planning the next day's inquiries. The shadows were deepening, but the truth, the teacup shard, the tobacco scent, the costly watch, and the torn letter fragment were accumulating. But the pattern remained elusive. Today, a crucial observation would bring her closer to the truth. The inquiries of the past days had deepened the mystery. The 5 suspects, Mrs. Eleanor Haydock, Mr. Reginald Forbes, Miss Lavinia Croft, Colonel Arthur Bantry, and Dr. Simon Trent, each had opportunity at the tea tent, their alibis fraying under scrutiny. The letter fragment, "Your affair ends now," hinted at a scandal, likely involving Mrs. Haydock and Trent, while Forbes's missing cyanide vial and Croft's teacup shard raised suspicions. Bantry's tobacco scent and protective anger over his daughter Dolly suggested a personal grudge, possibly tied to the wartime secret Croft had mentioned. Miss Marple knew that human nature, like her knitting, revealed its secrets through patience, and a single observation could unravel the tangle of lies. As she knitted, her mind drifted to a case from her youth, when a poisoner in a neighboring village had hidden arsenic in a sugar bowl, overlooked by all but a keen-eyed maid. The sugar bowl at the fete, mentioned by Mrs. Weatherby and Dr. Trent, nagged at her. Was it the key or another misdirection? She set her knitting aside and reached into her pocket, retrieving the mismatched button from Forbes's pharmacy. Its green thread didn't match his gray coat, but it did resemble the cuff of Dr. Trent's jacket, seen at the memorial tea. A careless exchange at the tea tent, perhaps. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Griselda Harmon, the vicar's wife, her curls bouncing as she bustled in with a basket of scones. "Miss Marple, you must be worn out with all this dreadful business," Griselda said, her voice bright but anxious. "I thought a scone might cheer you." Miss Marple smiled, accepting the offering. "You're too kind, Griselda. Any news from bottle?" Miss Marple noticed a mismatched label on a nearby vial, its ink smudged. "May I see?" she asked. Forbes hesitated, then handed it over. The label read potassium cyanide, but the date was recent, suggesting a hurried replacement. "A clerical error," Forbes stammered, but Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "Of course," she said, but her mind catalogued the discrepancy. Forbes's access to cyanide was undeniable, and his nervousness suggested more than a mistake. As she left, she glanced at his coat rack. No green-threaded buttons, but the memory of Trent's jacket lingered. Next, she visited the schoolhouse, where Miss Lavinia Croft was tending her garden, her spectacles glinting in the sunlight. The roses and foxgloves were pristine, but the teacup shard Miss Marple had found nagged at her. "Lavinia," she said, settling on a bench. "That anonymous letter Mrs. Haydock mentioned. Did you ever receive one?" Croft's hands froze on her pruning shears. "No," she said sharply, but her eyes darted. "Though I heard it was in a woman's hand." Miss Marple nodded, recalling the angular script of the torn letter fragment. "Your handwriting is distinctive," she said casually. Croft's lips thinned. "Are you accusing me?" she snapped. "Someone could forge it." Her defensiveness was telling, and Miss Marple made a mental note. The letter script matched Croft's, but a forgery was possible. "You stepped away from the tea tent," she added. "Did you see anyone near the sugar bowl?" Croft hesitated, then said, "Dr. Trent was there, fussing with it." Another accusation, or a truth? Her next stop was Bantry Manor, where Colonel Bantry was cleaning his shotgun, his ruddy face set in a scowl. The manor's oak-paneled study smelled of tobacco, matching the scent near Haydock's body. "Miss Marple," he boomed, "this village is falling apart." She nodded, her tone gentle. "Dolly seems distressed. Did Dr. Haydock upset her?" Trent's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Must have lost it," he said casually. Fete was crowded. His nonchalance was too practiced, and Miss Marple recalled his intimacy with Mrs. Haydock. The letter fragment, "Your affair ends now," pointed to a scandal, and Trent's ambition made him a prime suspect. Her final stop was the Haydock cottage, where Mrs. Eleanor Haydock was sorting through papers, her pearl necklace gleaming. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice strained. "You're persistent." Miss Marple smiled. "I wondered about that letter. Did it mention Dr. Trent?" Mrs. Haydock's fingers tightened on her pearls. "No," she said quickly. "Just vague threats." But her flush betrayed her, and Miss Marple noted the ash in the fireplace. "You and Dr. Trent are close," she said gently. Mrs. Haydock's eyes flashed. "He's a friend," she snapped. The denial was too sharp, and the letter fragment's words echoed in Miss Marple's mind. As she walked home, the sun dipping below the hills, her thoughts wove a tighter pattern. The button, matching Trent's jacket, placed him at the tea tent with opportunity. Forbes's smudged label and missing vial confirmed his access to cyanide, but his fear seemed genuine. Croft's handwriting and garden shard suggested guilt, yet her claim of forgery held weight. Bantry's tobacco and wartime secret hinted at a deeper motive, while Mrs. Haydock's pearls and intimacy with Trent pointed to an affair. The sugar bowl, a recurring thread, was likely the poison's source, hidden in plain sight. The clues, button, vial, shard, tobacco, watch, letter, were aligning. But the truth remained just out of reach. At her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and resumed her knitting, the blue scarf growing longer. The village, with its cozy cottages and blooming gardens, was a stage for human nature's dramas: greed, jealousy, betrayal. The button tied Trent to the scene, but Croft's handwriting and Forbes's cyanide were equally damning. Bantry's secret and Mrs. Haydock's pearls suggested hidden motives, but the sugar bowl was the key. A simple vest. Neighbors. Miss Jane Marple, her wicker basket slung over her arm, stepped out from her cottage, her straw hat shielding her sharp eyes from the twilight's glare. Her knitting, the soft blue scarf nearly complete, remained at home. Tonight her hands were free to gather the final threads of evidence, her mind weaving a pattern from the clues that had begun to align. The past day's inquiries had brought clarity to the mystery. The anonymous letter's ash, the cyanide vial, the teacup shard, the tobacco scent, Dr. Trent's costly watch, the torn letter fragment, "Your affair ends now," and the mismatched button had formed a tapestry of suspicion around 5 suspects: Mrs. Eleanor Haydock, Mr. Reginald Forbes, Miss Lavinia Croft, Colonel Arthur Bantry, and Dr. Simon Trent. Each had been near the tea tent, their alibis fraying under scrutiny. The sugar bowl, mentioned repeatedly, was likely the poison's source, and Miss Marple's crucial observation, the button matching Trent's jacket, had tightened the net. Motives, greed, jealousy, betrayal, or shame, were coming into focus, but the truth remained just out of reach. Tonight she would test the suspect's defenses, seeking the final clue to unravel the mystery. Her first stop was the village green, where Inspector Slack was overseeing the dismantling of the Fett's remnants. His pencil mustache twitched with frustration as he barked orders at his constables. "We've got Bantry," he announced to Miss Marple unprompted. Tobacco from his pipe was found near the body. Damning evidence. He held up a small pouch, its scent matching the colonel's distinctive blend. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Circumstantial, Inspector," she said mildly. "Many smoke similar tobacco." Slack snorted, dismissive. "He's our man. Motives clear. Argued with Haydock over village matters." But Miss Marple's mind turned to the tea tent, where the colonel had been organizing, not serving tea. The tobacco was a clue, but not conclusive. She stepped closer to the cordoned-off tent, her eyes falling on a discarded teacup, overlooked by the police. "Mine," he stammered. I don't know how it got there." But his eyes darted to the cabinet, and Miss Marple pressed further. "You supplied cyanide to Miss Croft," she said. Forbes nodded, swallowing hard. "For rats locked in her shed." She returned the vial, empty. His admission was a crack in his alibi, and Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "Of course," she said, but the button and the empty vial tightened the net around him. Her next stop was the schoolhouse garden, where Miss Lavinia Croft was pruning roses by lantern light, her spectacles glinting. The garden's order contrasted with her tense posture, and Miss Marple noted a small shed, its door padlocked. "Lavinia," she said, settling on a bench. "You mentioned a forged letter. Did you see anyone near the sugar bowl?" Croft's hands froze on her shears. "I told you Dr. Trent was there," she said sharply. "And Mrs. Haydock was pouring tea." Her accusation was pointed, but Miss Marple recalled the lipstick-smudged cup. "Your shade of lipstick is distinctive," she said casually. Croft's eyes widened. "I don't wear lipstick," she snapped, but her flush betrayed her. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the shed. "May I see where you kept the cyanide?" she asked. Croft hesitated, then led her to the shed, unlocking it to reveal an empty vial, its label faded. "Return to Forbes," she said. The vial's presence confirmed her access, but the lipstick smudge and her defensiveness suggested more. At Bantry Manor, Colonel Bantry was polishing his medals, his ruddy face set in a scowl. The study smelled of tobacco, matching the scent near the body. "Miss Marple," he boomed. "Slack's got it in for me." She nodded, her tone gentle. "The tobacco is troubling," she said. Bantry's eyes narrowed. "Half the village smokes my blend," he growled. "Haydock was meddling, Dolly's crush, village council. But I didn't kill him." His denial was fierce, but Miss Marple recalled his wartime secret, hinted at by Croft. "Affair ends now," flashed in her mind. "You and Mrs. Haydock are close," she said gently. Trent's eyes narrowed. "She's a friend," he said. The denial was too quick, and the watch's engraving tightened the net. Her final stop was the Haydock cottage, where Mrs. Eleanor Haydock was sorting papers, her pearl necklace gleaming against her black dress. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice strained, "you're tireless." Miss Marple smiled. "That letter fragment, 'Your affair ends now.' Was it about you and Dr. Trent?" Mrs. Haydock's fingers froze on her pearls. "Nonsense," she snapped, but her flush betrayed her. James knew nothing, but Miss Marple recalled their intimacy at the memorial tea. "Your pearls are lovely," she said. "A gift from Dr. Trent?" Mrs. Haydock's eyes flashed. "From James," she said, but her voice wavered. The lie was thin, and the affair was now a clear motive. As she walked home, the stars emerging in a velvet sky, Miss Marple's thoughts wove a tighter pattern. The lipstick-smudged cup pointed to Croft, whose denial of wearing lipstick was false. Forbes's empty vial and nervous tick suggested guilt, but his fear seemed genuine. Bantry's tobacco was damning, but his motive, protecting Dolly or hiding a secret, was unclear. Trent's watch engraving and the letter fragment confirmed an affair with Mrs. Haydock, a powerful motive, but the button tied him directly to the tea tent. The sugar bowl remained the key, its contents poisoned in the fet's chaos. The clues, button, vial, shard, tobacco, watch, letter, lipstick, were aligning. But the truth required one final push. At her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and resumed her knitting, the blue scarf nearly complete. The village, with its cozy cottages and blooming gardens, was a stage for human nature's dramas: greed, jealousy, betrayal. The lipstick smudge ruled out Mrs. Haydock, whose bold red shade didn't match. Forbes's vial and Croft's shed pointed to access, but Trent's button and watch tied the weight of an impending revelation. Miss Jane Marple, her wicker basket left at home, walked purposefully toward the village hall, her straw hat shielding her sharp eyes from the fading light. Her knitting, the soft blue scarf nearly complete, remained untouched. Tonight, her hands were free to unravel the final threads of the mystery. her mind poised to confront the truth hidden in the everyday moments of St. Mary Mead. The past days had woven a tight tapestry of clues. The anonymous letter's ash, the cyanide vial, the teacup shard, the tobacco scent, Dr. Trent's engraved watch, the torn letter fragment, "Your affair ends now," the mismatched button, and the lipstick-smudged cup. The 5 suspects: Mrs. Eleanor Haydock, Mr. Reginald Forbes, Miss Lavinia Croft, Colonel Arthur Bantry, and Dr. Simon Trent, had been near the tea tent, their alibis fraying under scrutiny. The sugar bowl, repeatedly mentioned, was the poison's source, and the lipstick smudge had ruled out Mrs. Haydock, pointing instead to Miss Croft. Miss Marple's crucial observations, the button matching Trent's jacket and the watch's engraving, had narrowed the net. But a final confrontation was needed to reveal the murderer. Tonight, at Willowby Forge, she would gather the suspects and lay bare the truth, as delicately as she might unravel a tangled skein of wool. The village hall was lit by lanterns, casting a warm glow over the oak beams and the long table where the Fett's tea tent had stood. Reverend Harmon, his face pale with nerves, had agreed to host the gathering, believing Miss Marple's quiet request for a village meeting was a gesture of closure. Griselda Harmon bustled about, arranging chairs and offering tea, her curls bouncing despite the somber mood. The suspects arrived one by one, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Mrs. Eleanor Haydock, her pearl necklace gleaming against her black dress, sat with composed elegance, though her fingers twisted her handkerchief. Mr. Reginald Forbes hovered near the cup, overlooked by the police, held cyanide in the tea that killed Dr. Haydock. The poison was in the sugar bowl, slipped in during the Fett's chaos. Inspector Slack snorted, but she continued undeterred. Each of you was near the tea tent with opportunity, but motives and clues point to one. She turned to Mrs. Haydock. Eleanor, your pearls are lovely, a gift from Dr. Trent, not your husband. Mrs. Haydock's face flushed, her hand flying to her necklace. That's not true, she protested, but Miss Marple held up the torn letter fragment. Your affair ends now, she read. This was meant for Dr. Haydock, warning him of your affair with Dr. Trent. Trent's smile faltered, his hand covering his watch engraved, "To Simon, from E." An affair is a motive, Miss Marple said, but the lipstick on this cup is not yours. Mrs. Haydock's shoulders sagged, relief mingling with shame. She faced Colonel Bantry next. Your tobacco was near the body, and you argued with Dr. Haydock over Dolly's crush and a wartime secret. Bantry's scowl deepened, his pipe clenched. I didn't kill him, he boomed. He meddled, but I'd never. Miss Marple nodded. Your tobacco is common, and you were organizing, not serving tea. You're innocent, though your temper misled us. Bantry exhaled, his relief palpable. To Mr. Forbes, she said, your cyanide vial was missing, and this button was found near your stall. She held up the green-threaded button. Forbes's glasses slipped, his tick frantic. Not mine, he stammered. I supplied cyanide to Miss Croft, but I didn't. Miss Marple nodded. Your fear is genuine, and the button matches Dr. Trent's jacket, not yours. You're not the murderer, though your carelessness raised suspicion. Forbes slumped, trembling but relieved. She turned to Dr. Trent. Your watch engraved by Mrs. Haydock, and this button place you at the tea tent. Your ambition betrayed you. She produced the letter fragment, its angular script matching Croft's. Dr. Haydock discovered you were embezzling school funds, threatening to expose you. You poisoned his tea to silence him. The room gasped, Griselda's teapot clattering. Croft's face contorted, her spectacles slipping. He was going to ruin me, she cried, her voice breaking. Years of work, gone. I only meant to scare him. Her confession spilled out, a tangle of guilt and desperation. Inspector Slack, stunned, stepped forward, his handcuffs ready. Miss Croft, you're under arrest, he said, his brusqueness softened by shock. Croft sagged, her stern facade crumbling as the constable led her away. Miss Marple stepped back, her voice gentle. Human nature is predictable, but its secrets hide in plain sight. The sugar bowl, the lipstick, the letter. They told the story. The suspects dispersed, Mrs. Haydock and Trent avoiding each other's gaze, Bantry muttering apologies, Forbes trembling with relief. Reverend Harmon offered a prayer, his voice steady now, and Griselda, tearful, pressed a scone on Miss Marple. You're a marvel, she whispered. Miss Marple smiled, her work done. As she walked home, the stars bright above St. Mary Mead, her thoughts were calm. The clues, letter, vial, shard, tobacco, watch, button, lipstick, had aligned, the pattern complete. The affair was a red herring, as was the vagrant and the scones. Croft's greed, masked by her stern respectability, had driven her to murder, a truth hidden in the everyday chaos of the fete. At her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp, her mind already turning to tomorrow's tea, where she would explain the final details. The village, with its cozy cottages and blooming gardens, would heal, and the truth, like her knitting, had emerged through patience and care. Chapter 10. The Threads Unraveled. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a gentle warmth, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the thatched roofs and rose-covered trellises, casting a golden glow on the cobbled lanes. The village, shaken by the revelation of Miss Clues, anonymous letters ash, cyanide vial, teacup shard, tobacco scent, Dr. Trent's engraved watch, torn letter fragment, mismatched button, and lipstick-smudged cup, aligning to expose Miss Croft's greed-driven crime. The sugar bowl, laced with cyanide during the fete's chaos, had been the murder weapon. And Croft's embezzlement of school funds, uncovered by Dr. Haydock, had been her motive. The other suspects, Mrs. Eleanor Haydock, Mr. Reginald Forbes, Colonel Arthur Bantry, and Dr. Simon Trent, had been entangled in their own secrets, their alibis fraying, but ultimately innocent. Miss Marple knew that human nature, like her knitting, required patience to unravel, and today's gathering would tie up the loose ends, restoring peace to St. Mary Mead. The vicarage, with its ivy-clad walls and sagging gate, was alive with the hum of villagers, their voices a mix of relief and curiosity. Reverend Clement Harmon, his kindly face less strained, welcomed everyone into the drawing room, where Griselda Harmon bustled about, her curls bouncing as she poured tea from a gleaming silver urn. The suspects, now cleared, were present, their expressions a blend of gratitude and unease. Mrs. Eleanor Haydock sat on a velvet settee, her pearl necklace replaced by a simple black ribbon, her composure softened by humility. Mr. Reginald Forbes lingered near the door, his glasses steady for once, his nervous tick subdued. Colonel Arthur Bantry stood by the hearth, his pipe unlit, his ruddy face relaxed. Dr. Simon Trent, his expensive watch tucked under a sleeve, leaned against a wall, his charm tempered by chastened silence. Inspector Slack, his pencil mustache still twitching, sat grudgingly in a corner, his notebook closed. Miss Marple stood, her frail frame commanding the room with quiet authority. "Good morning," she said softly, her eyes sweeping the gathering. "Dr. Haydock's murder was a tragedy, but the truth has been found, hidden in the simple details of our village." Body raised suspicion, as did your arguments with Dr. Haydock over Dolly and village matters. Bantry's scowl softened. "I was a fool," he admitted, "but I'd never harm him." Miss Marple nodded. "Your tobacco was common, and you were organizing, not serving tea. The wartime secret was another of Miss Croft's misdirections, a rumor she spread to deflect attention." Bantry exhaled, his relief palpable. She faced Mr. Forbes. "Your missing cyanide vial and nervous manner made you a suspect." She held up the mismatched button. "This, found near your stall, matched Dr. Trent's jacket, not yours. But your fear was genuine. You supplied cyanide to Miss Croft, but you didn't kill." Forbes's shoulders slumped, his glasses steady. "I should have been more careful," he muttered. Miss Marple's smile was reassuring. "Your honesty cleared you." To Dr. Trent, she said, "Your watch engraved by Mrs. Haydock, and the button placed you at the tea tent. Your ambition to inherit the practice was a motive, but the lipstick cleared you." Trent's eyes dropped, his charm gone. "I let ambition blind me," he said quietly. Miss Marple nodded. "You were complicit in secrets, but not murder." Finally, she addressed the room. Miss Croft, a respected school teacher, hid her crime behind respectability. She embezzled school funds, and when Dr. Haydock discovered it, she poisoned his tea, using cyanide from her shed, supplied by Mr. Forbes. The teacup shard in her garden, the lipstick on the cup, and her forged letter betrayed her. She meant to scare him, but her fear of exposure drove her to murder. The villagers murmured, Griselda's teapot clattering as she wiped a tear. Inspector Slack, his skepticism softened, nodded grudgingly. "You've got a knack, Miss Marple," he admitted. She continued, her voice gentle. "The sugar bowl was the perfect," said. "Father's calmer now." Miss Marple smiled, patting her hand. "Mind your heart, dear," she said gently, recalling Dolly's crush on Haydock. The village, with its cozy cottages and blooming gardens, was healing, its secrets laid bare. As she walked home, the sun climbing higher, Miss Marple's thoughts were calm. The clues, letter, vial, shard, tobacco, watch, button, lipstick, had formed a pattern, each stitch revealing the truth. The affair, the vagrant, the scones were red herrings, but Croft's greed, masked by her stern facade, had unraveled under scrutiny. The sugar bowl, a simple vessel, had held the poison, and the lipstick had named the killer. At her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the window, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The blue scarf was complete, its edges neat, a testament to patience. She tied it off, her mind at peace. St. Mary Mead, with its quiet dramas, would move forward, and Miss Marple, ever watchful, would be ready for its next mystery.